In today's video, I'm going to cover the whole entire market in terms of Dow Jones, Nasdaq, and S&P 500, including the economic calendar. Now, I do post these videos daily, so I highly encourage you to double check the latest video on my channel so that way you get the most up-to-date information. And before I get to the technical analysis portion, I'm going to go over the economic calendar. And for Friday, August 16th, 2024, at 10 a.m. we have consumer sentiment preliminary. 8:30 a.m. we have housing starts, as well as building permits. And then at 1:25 p.m. we have Chicago Fed President Austan Goolsbee speech. Now, one thing to note is next week we also have U.S. leading economic indicators. We also have minutes of Fed's July FOMC meeting as well. Jerome Powell is not going to speak after that, though. And then at the end of the week as well, we have Fed Chair Jerome Powell expected to speak at Jackson Hole retreat. So it could be a somewhat of an eventful week next week. Mind you, in my opinion, the markets will tend to still move up based off the longer terms of the MACD lines, which indicate for a bearish bullish movement. And also given the fact that the market is expecting about 25 to 50 basis points rate cut in September. And NVIDIA earnings is coming up at the end of the month, and the market is acting favorably because they're expecting the earnings to be a pretty good earnings / beat as well. And I believe they're going to be giving out an outlook during that time as well too. So the market is moving up in an uptrend overall, and we're approaching all-time highs. And in my opinion, potentially either going to test them or pass them. So we shall see. Now, one thing to note though, in terms of the movements, we just keep going higher, which is obviously awesome. But the only thing is though, the shorter term MACD lines seem like they want to pull back at least just for one trading day potentially, but the momentum is just too strong, too high. So given that, there is a potential that because we're on Friday's trading day, where the market might not want to act favorably towards the end of the trading day for anticipation of the weekend, where in case something could happen, and then continue to the uptrend more so on the Monday trading day and then leading up to the rest of the week. Because I checked NVIDIA and Tesla, both of them are mega cap stocks and moving favorably. The continuation to the upside could be still carried, but the MACD lines seem like the limits that they're at, they could be somewhat stagnant. But the thing is though, it's weird because the MACD lines and the limits they're at, it almost feels like the market just wants to push through those limits still. So in a way, you could almost don't even expect a downside regardless for the markets or NVIDIA and Tesla, because regardless, in a way, the markets will continue to the upside leading up next week still. So it's too much of a risk to bank on a potential pull down, in my opinion, given the momentum and what the market is expecting, plus the rate cuts in September, so on and so forth. Just for the time being, I would say. I wouldn't say wait until September and expect upside from now till September, but for the potential short-term pullback for like one day, potentially, not a pullback, but like a drop down just for one day, it doesn't seem like it's guaranteed. So it's just too much of a risk to bank on it, if that makes sense. But either way, what I'm going to give is a potential, I'm going to give the upper limits and the lower limits. And at the same time, I'm going to give a potential play as if it were to go up and then pull down by the end of the trading day to lower, like in a way, minimize risk, whoever is market makers and so on and so forth for the weekend, if that makes sense. Now, for the S&P, I'm going to be looking at SPY, which is an ETF for the S&P 500. Mind you, closed at $553.07. Again, SPY, ETF for S&P 500, it's just a different ratio. That's all it is. And it's got closer to the higher limit, I would say, for the most part of this range, which is pretty much about $554, $555 and some change. But I think it'll break through it anyway. It's not a big deal. The limit, then that's the next one, for the most part, is about the 556 and some change. Now, there is a possibility the 556 and some change. Essentially, it was 557, I should say, because it's pretty much close to 557. So there is a chance for the one scenario that I mentioned is it goes up to $557 and some change, let's just say. And then by the end of the trading day, it has difficulties passing 557. And then at the end of the trading day, it comes back down to, let's say, potentially to a lower level of like 550 and some change, or the 551 and some change, potentially. That is in case the market makers don't want to hold over the weekend for some reason. And again, MACD lines might hold true, but I'm not expecting that because, again, the momentum for the upside, regardless of MACD lines showing a potential one-day drop, is just more to the upside. So after passing $556 or $557 and some change, there's a chance that the market just could close at that and doesn't go higher. But then the next level I would expect would be 559 and some change, essentially $560 and some change, and then going back up to the all-time highs of the $563, $564 and some change. The only thing is, though, I'm not expecting the $563, $564 and some change all-time highs for Friday. That would be more so for next week, trading week, and that is if the markets still are pulling to the upside. So we have to assess it basically day by day and go from there. Now, if we were to come to the downside and we don't even have the upside going up completely at all, then we have potentially support at the $550 and some change range, and then the $548 and some change, and then $545 and some change, and then $542 and some change. Now, if we were to drop, personally, because we have the moving average as $547 and some change, $543 and some change, give or take, within the $542, $543, I don't expect to go lower than $542, $543 and some change. If we were, in my opinion, this range right about here would pretty much stop us out for sure, $538 and some change. If we do end up going lower, something drastic is happening, and the momentum has been completely flipped, and there must be not necessarily a catalyst fully to pull us down, but there is a underlying reason that we're dropping lower than that, in my opinion. And then you could potentially rely on the moving averages as the last one, about $536 and some change. But I'm not expecting a drop that drastic for the most part. In my opinion, it would be about the $542 and some change range, give or take, if we were to drop down drastically for Friday's trading day. Now for Nasdaq, I'm going to be looking at ETF QQQ, which is the exact same thing, just different ratio. And this one did hit the upper limit, which is pretty surprising and impressive. But mind you, it closed at the $474.42, give or take. And we basically hit the upper limit that I believe I mentioned. I'm pretty sure I mentioned the yesterday's trading day, which was about $475 and some change. Which is surprising because it's getting close to this upward trend resistance line dating back since 2010. So in case you're a new viewer, just to visually show you, since 2010, upward trend resistance line dating back since 2010. But mind you, the markets was still going up. So this doesn't mean the market's not going up. It's still going up. And then we had a breakout since 2020 to 2022, and then came back underneath it. And then we tested it back in March of 2024, but got knocked down. And then we broke through it as of recent as well. But then we came back underneath it. So broke through it, came back underneath it, and this is the line right about here since 2010. So we're still underneath it right now. And in my opinion, in case the same situation happens, like I mentioned for the S&P, because all S&P, Nasdaq, and Dow Jones are showing the same thing, essentially upside based off the MACD line, but they're showing a potential one day, not necessarily a pullback, but just a drop, like a small drop. So if that does happen, technically tomorrow, then I would expect that this upward trend resistance line dating back since 2010 could be the limit. So it depends on when we hit it, obviously, but it's essentially about $482 to $483 price point range. And then by the end of the trading day, arguably, if the market was to technically come down to before the end of the week / not to hold over the weekend, and / MACD lines does somewhat hold true, and momentum does stop, and the MACD lines are more followed in a way, then it would come down to the $475, $475 and some change range, give or take. But most likely what will happen, just like the S&P, like I mentioned, is because the momentum is just more to the upside, again, because of NVIDIA expectations to be, it's a mega cap stock carrying the markets, and Tesla is moving favorably too, and that is a mega cap stock too. And for the fact that the market is anticipating a rate cut, then most likely probably what will happen is it will go to the $483 and some change, give or take, and just stop there by the end of the trading day, and then lead up more upside for the next week, trading week, right? But after the 483 and some change, then basically you're looking at resistance at the $486, $487 and some change. I'm not expecting to go any higher than that until but next trading week. Now to the downside, if we were to come down, we could potentially have support at the $465 and some change. But essentially we'd probably come down most likely to the 400 if it was a not major pull down, but a decent pull down. Then we'd probably come down to 461 and some change, 460 and some change, give or take. and the 460. So essentially the moving average 463 and some change, and then the 461 and some change, but I'm pretty sure we would see a decent drop to hit the 460 and some change. And then potentially, if you think it's going to be a pretty big pull down, we probably come down to the moving averages right about here, 454, 453 and some change, but I'm not expecting that much of a drop. That would be too drastic. MACD lines is not showing that for past at one trading day kind of thing. And again, the momentum is pretty strong to the upside regardless. So if anything, not best case scenario, but if it's a decent drop, I wouldn't expect to go lower than 460 and some change. Again, this is just my opinion, so please do your own due diligence and research before buying and selling. Now for the Dow Jones, essentially same thing, but this one's going to be more testing the highs like sooner rather than later versus the S&P and Nasdaq. I would say the next one that's closer would be the S&P. The Nasdaq's the last one, but mind you, we closed at 40,563 points. And if it were to go to the upside and get pulled down, the level I would expect to go to is pretty much, when I checked it earlier, it's about 40,850 points, give or take. You could argue the 40,760 points, give or take, could be the upper limit based off these two spike ups, and then get pulled down. And then I would expect this upward trend resistance line / potential support dating back since 2021. Right about here, so 1, 2, and then this breaks down to multiple touch points right about here when I zoom in. Like I stated, multiple touch points, 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. And there's a support bounce off, and then a resistance and resistance, but that potentially could act as support on the way down like we saw earlier. And if that is the case, when we go up to those higher levels that I mentioned earlier, probably come back down to find support at roughly about 40,450 points. Again, depends on when we hit the support level, but within that range, give or take. That is it for the scenario, like I mentioned, for MACD lines goes up and then gets pulled down, and then it's pretty much flat kind of day if you really think about it. And then if the market is moving favorably to the upside, essentially we just close at the higher limit that I mentioned, about 40,850 points, give or take, and then leading up to next week to test the all-time highs. If we do go higher than 40,850, I would expect the 41,000 price point to pretty much stop us out for the end of trading day Friday. But again, more so moving to next week and getting closer to reach the all-time highs and create new all-time highs for Dow Jones. Now, if we were to come to the downside, again, potentially we could find support at the 40,440 points, give or take 430 points, around that ballpark. But more so, we probably come down to these moving averages. So about 40,020 points is showing right now, but essentially 40,000 clean. And then next moving average about 39,815 points, and then 39,615 points. Again, that's probably most likely 800 and then 600 clean, but essentially 39,000. In my opinion, the lowest I would expect to drop for Friday's trading day if we were to drop down drastically, because again, MACD line's more showing to the upside for a little bit more of the longer term, not necessarily long term, but right after one trading day kind of thing, and Nvidia stock and anticipation for rate cuts, so on and so forth. So nothing really negative in the horizon fully. Then I would expect about 39,800 points to pretty much hold us, which is based off the moving average, and horizontally you could see support / resistance, right? So you could see that drop right about, essentially right almost around the ballpark, about 39,800 give or take for that drop. And then same thing with here, and then the resistance levels ballpark, give or take. So there's that. And then in case you think it's going to drop lower, in my opinion, that 39,600 would pretty much hold us with that moving average right about there. But that's basically it for today's video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you found it beneficial. If you did, consider dropping a like. It does help with the channel, so thank you so much for that. I do appreciate it. And if you found it beneficial, consider subscribing so you can be notified when I do upload the next videos, because again, I do post these daily. And that's basically it. Thanks again. Take care. God bless and peace.